Welcome to my guide for the lore of beasts. In this guide we will cover how every single spell in the lore works and how to best use them in battle to give you the greatest advantage. The lore of beasts has a range of spells that can cover most of the major types and can be used offensively on your enemies or defensively on your allies. It's available to spellcasters from the Lizardmen, Dark Elves, Empire, Bretonnia, Wood Elves, and of course, the Beastmen. Our first spell is Wild Heart, and it is of course the passive of the list. As usual, it is activated when the spellcaster casts any spell, and its effect is felt map-wide by all allies. It grants increase to the power reserves, an improved power regeneration rate, and has a 29-second duration. While it won't have any massive effects in battle, it is handy to have more magic coming in while some is going out, and will allow you to cast more spells over the course of the battle. Our first actual spell is Flock of Doom. It's a direct damage spell, so won't need line of sight to be effective, as long as your caster can get the spell off and is within 100 meter range. It costs 6 winds of magic and has a 30-second cooldown, and is best used against multiple enemies rather than single targets. It causes damage to combatants in a 30 meter radius, and can affect multiple units at once, and the effect lasts 7 seconds. There is a chance that opponents will resist this damage however, so don't be surprised if you aren't melting the enemy in a single cast. Overcasting this brings a cost to 12 winds of magic, increases the range to 300 meters, and the duration to 14 seconds. As always, overcasting brings a 50% risk of the spell miscasting, causing some damage to your spellcaster, so use this at your own risk. Overall, it's a decent spell for causing some light damage to clumps of enemies, which can, in some cases, give your units the advantage and allow them to win the melee faster, which is never a bad thing. With that in mind, it's probably best to use this spell when your units are in melee, so you have the best chance of doing enough damage at once to break the enemy. Pan's Impenetrable Pelt is up next, and this time it's an augment spell. It costs 7 winds of magic and has a 43-second cooldown, and obviously since it's an augment spell, it targets your allies, or the spellcaster themselves. It has a cast range of 200 meters and grants the affected unit plus 24% move speed and plus 22 physical resistance, and it has a duration of 44 seconds. Overcasting this spell brings the cost to 13 winds of magic and lets you cast the effect in a 40 meter area of effect, and of course brings a 50% miscast chance. This is a great spell to use when your opponents bring a lot of armor piercing, as it will be much less effective versus the physical resistance. The speed part can be useful when you're making your way into battle and getting peppered down by AP fire, as it will allow your units to enter the fight quicker and be in a better state when they do. Our third spell is the Amber Spear, and it's a magical missile, so you will need line of sight for this one. It costs 7 winds of magic and has a cooldown of 43 seconds, and you can obviously only target enemy units from a range of 10 to 200 meters. When used, your caster will fire a single projectile, which will do moderate magical damage, which makes it great for targeting any particularly armoured units as it will cut right through. If you get a good angle, this can also penetrate through several units before exploding, so choose your targets well. Overcasting this spell will bring the cost to 11 winds of magic, and increase the AP damage of the impact and explosion, and of course bring a 50% chance of miscasting. Both versions of the spell are great for using either before or during melee, but you have to be aware when you're aiming, as both the impact and the explosion can hurt your units if you aren't careful. It's also a great spell for Lord dueling, as long as you can get the angle right so that the explosion also hits the Lord as well as the missile. The Curse of Amrare is our first hex spell. It costs 11 winds of magic and has a 47-second cooldown, and can of course only affect enemies. It has a 200 meter cast range, and can either be cast directly on enemy units or on the ground if you're trying to get a bunch of them at once. It causes affected units to lose 26 melee attack, 24% speed, and 60% accuracy in a 40 meter radius for 39 seconds. Overcasting it causes the cost to increase to 14 and the AoE to increase to 55 meters, and of course has the 50% miscast chance. This is a great spell to use either in the front lines where your units are going against something particularly tough to cut back their damage and ensure they can't run away, or for charging down some ranged units that you need to make sure can't escape or hit you on the approach. The Transformation of Kadon is the first summon spell we've covered in the series, and it's probably one of the better summons in the default spell laws. It costs 13 winds of magic and has a 45-second cooldown, as well as a 2-use limit to ensure you can't just spam them the whole battle. It must be cast on the ground so you can't pop him up on the walls, and has a 60 meter casting range. The unit summoned is a Feral Manticore, and it's really good in combat and can take on a couple of infantry units alone without too much trouble. Unfortunately, since it's a summon, it will degrade over time and will of course not be added to your army once you leave the battlefield. There's no overcast version for this spell, but you really don't need it as the base spell is pretty strong as it is and can be great for an army that otherwise has no access to flying units like the Empire. If you have the spell available, then it's definitely worth using purely for the versatility of a flying powerhouse in your army. Our final spell is Wizzian's Wild Form, and it's an augment spell. It costs just 4 winds of magic and has a cooldown of 28 seconds, and can be cast on single friendly units. It has a cast range of 200 meters, and any units affected will be granted plus 30 armor and plus 25% weapon damage for the entire 22-second duration. When overcast, you gain the ability to cast the spell in a 40 meter AoE to 300 meter range, and with the usual 50% miscast chance, and an increase in cost to 8 winds of magic. It's a great spell for buffing your front lines, especially with the overcast version, as depending on your positioning, you can get a huge number of units with some very substantial buffs that could very well change the tide of battle. I'd say it's better using your tougher units, as the increase in weapon damage will be more substantial than it would on weak units due to it being percentage based. That concludes this guide on the lore of beasts. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do leave it a like, as it does help out a lot. Leave a comment with anything you think I missed or should include in future videos. If you'd like to see more videos about Total War Warhammer, then there are links in the card and the description for the playlist to my series. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, then maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.